In March of 2020, Legend Story Studios released their second Flesh and Blood set, Arcane Rising. Following in the footsteps of Welcome to Wraith and the Fiendal Spring Tunic, Arcane Rising had its own generic legendary equipment piece, the Arcanite Skullcap. And players soon found out that this card was very, very good. This card very quickly took over the competitive scene, being played in pretty much every class that didn't have a strong headpiece, which was most of them. In fact, Arcanite Skullcap saw so much play that it rivaled the price of Spring Tunic for quite some time, both hitting well over $200 at their peaks. There was no stopping it. This card was topping event after event, cementing itself as the best headpiece in the game. And it was probably going to remain that way for quite some time. Even if they released more class-specific helms, there were still plenty of heroes that would need the Skullcap. And some of those class helms would just be sideboard options anyways. No, Skullcap had proven itself to be the best headpiece in the game, and nothing was going to change that. While Arcanite Skullcap still shows up in almost 40% of decks on FabDB, it now ranks only number 16 in popularity. Far, far lower than when it was played in almost every deck. So what happened? What made this once powerhouse card a shadow of its former self? Why does nobody play Arcanite Skullcap anymore? For anyone that's been playing the game since before Uprising's release, you probably know the answer to this question. Crown of Providence. It's Crown of Providence. But obviously, if that's all there was to it, this video would be over, so let's dig into it. In a previous video on why everyone plays Command & Conquer, I mentioned both of these legendary helms, focusing on Crown of Providence's specific interaction with the staple Majestic. Crown has the neat little ability to block a CNC, tuck the arsenal, draw a card, and just take 4 damage. Even though you can only do it once per game, being able to keep the exact same card economy while facing down a Command & Conquer, turns out, is pretty useful. And Skullcap just doesn't do this. In fact, it doesn't even block for 2 without jumping through the hoop of having a lower life total than your opponent. Even that Arcane Barrier 3, which is only rarely useful, is locked behind that life requirement. However, despite this, there is one huge upside to the Skullcap. If the requirements are properly met, it blocks for 3. And having a helm that can stop 2 breakpoint on hits is incredibly powerful. How many times have you faced down a Snatch for 4 or Chilling Ice Vein for 5? You can give up a whole card to stop that extra damage, but that's a bad deal for you value-wise. And this is where your equipment comes in clutch, letting you block those breakpoints without wasting extra cards from your hand. And not every deck needs to arsenal constantly, making Command & Conquer less effective. Sure, Rangers and go-wide decks like Briar might be terrified of CNC, but heroes like Dromai or Azuri? Those heroes have tons of 3 blocks and they're fine playing a 2-card hand when they need to. In certain matchups, it could be argued that the extra block from Skullcap is at least as effective as the Crown of Providence's tuck effect. However, there are a couple more things that make the Crown of Providence a bit more playable than Skullcap, and it has to do with player skill. See, the Crown does 2 things. It blocks for 2, and it's a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card. And not just for blocking CNC, sometimes you need to use it to fix a hand where you drew all reds or all blues. Or, more commonly, you need to get that card that's been stuck in your arsenal for 3 turns because you really shouldn't have put it there, but you just really wanted to draw 4 cards instead of 3. Basically, the Crown of Providence can save you when you mess up. And this is especially useful at bigger tournaments because after several hours of grueling play, you're inevitably going to make some mistakes. And Skullcap? Well, it's the opposite. The whole time you're playing this card, you have to play the minigame to make sure that your life stays lower than your opponent's. And there are going to be games where even the best players are going to forget about that life management on a turn where it really truly matters. Think of it like Fiendal's Spring Tunic. Every single person who has ever played this card has forgotten a tunic trigger at least once. With so much going on in games, people forget things, and when it comes to helms, Crown of Providence is just less to remember. It doesn't matter what the life totals are or what the game state is like, it always does what it's supposed to do. When it comes down to it, Flesh and Blood is a competitive game, and people are going to play what is best. With limited deck size, players need to make sure that every single card is absolutely necessary. Even in the certain matchups where Skullcap is slightly better than Crown of Providence, it's not so much of a difference that it warrants taking a whole slot just for that slight advantage. So is that it? Is Arcanite Skullcap just a useless card destined to fade into the annals of history, a once titan brought so low by sheer power creep? Not really. Crown of Providence might be the best competitive pick, but most players aren't going to a Calling or the Pro Tour. They're just going to their local armory. And when one is $200+ and the other is about $50, Arcanite Skullcap might not be the go-to competitive card that it once was, but honestly, it's still great and it's the perfect thing to suggest for new players. It's still an incredibly solid piece of equipment, and that life management requirement is actually a really great way to teach new players some of the more nuanced parts of the game. So sure, competitively, no one really plays the Arcanite Skullcap anymore. But unlike the other cards in this series, despite the fact that it is outclassed, it's still an incredibly powerful card and is absolutely worth running in your decks.
If you liked this video and wanted to support me, consider checking out my Patreon. There's extra bonuses like Talishar card sleeves, early access to videos, and even your own GigaChad card. And to those who are already supporting me, you have my undying thanks. It's because of Chads like you that I can continue to do what I do. So please, stay Chadly, my friends.